Greetings and welcome everyone to another edition of Consciousness Cafe. I want to thank you all for joining us for a very interesting guest, Wendy Rose Williams, the author of several books. One was Heaven Sent, another was The Flow, #1, Plymouth Plantation, and Regression Healing I, The Huntsman, the Lord High Mayor, and the World War II Soldier, which I have read and was very interesting. And we look forward to covering that and many related subjects with you all tonight and with our special guest, Wendy Rose Williams. So Wendy is a hypnotherapist, past life regressionist, regression healing specialist. She has experience with the Dolores Cannon quantum healing hypnosis technique, as well as having been trained with the Newton Institute. And I'm sure many other things we're going to learn about Wendy as we continue here. So I want to thank you for joining us, Wendy, and say hello.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me here in the Consciousness Cafe. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's our absolute pleasure to have you. So, how did your journey into regression get started, Wendy? Tell us how you got started.
In the strangest way possible. Had no grand plan, but I think it's so interesting how our human self may not know what our soul has planned. And what happened for me was I was introduced to Journey of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton back in 2010 via a Match.com date that I went on. And he was getting ready to go for his second Life Between Lives, spiritual regression, and had put that right into his Match dating profile. And I just thought it was fascinating. The minute I heard LBL, I was like, what is that? And looked it up and found Journey of Souls and just started reading. And it went from there. So I don't think this is one of Match's advertising points. You might meet your soulmate. You might get a spiritual awakening.
Meet people from past lives.
Right, exactly.
Other than the group that you incarnated with officially.
Right.
Well, it's funny how Spirit has a way of lining things up for us.
Yes, I think they just meet us wherever we're at. And sometimes it can feel a bit like a real surprise. It can feel a bit like an ambush, but that's okay too, because sense of humor is a life requirement. And we just need to keep going with it.
And for all of our guests here tonight, we've got a nice crowd. I'm Daniel Endy, one of the members of the Consciousness Cafe leadership group. And I too have experience in hypnotherapy and past life regression. So that'll make this even more multidimensional. So tell us more about how you got started, Wendy, and let's start from there.
So what happened was once I read Journey of Souls and started dating the man who it turned out to have the contract to wake me up spiritually, was I went for my first session back in 2011 with a Michael Newton therapist. And in that 2 hours, I could not believe the difference. To let go of a lifetime of anxiety, to be able to clean up scenes from earlier in this lifetime, some childhood issues, and to be able to see not one, but 2 past lives in a lot of detail. It was like, oh my goodness, give me more of this. So I signed up right after that very first past life regression. I asked the therapist to please get out her calendar. I said, I'm ready to book a life between lives. And she looked at me and she's like, well, wasn't this your first ever session and you don't have any spiritual practice and you don't know how to meditate and you're brand new to all this? And I was like, yes, get out your book. We're going to schedule my life between lives now. And that's what we did for a year later. And
Wow.
I didn't know why, but I just knew some things needed to happen in the interim. And that just worked out perfectly. And when I transcribed that 4-hour session, because there was so much information, I was happy to listen to the recording, but I actually transcribed it. I had 65 pages of information of things that I just hadn't known before. And they were life-changing, they were life-enhancing, they were life-affirming. There was so much about life purpose. There was so much about helping with challenging relationships. There's a little bit about improving health. So it just was amazing. And then a year later, I had 2 quantum healing hypnotherapy sessions with a Dolores Cannon practitioner. And that's where we really got into the physical healing, and we got more into, started to get a little bit into some of the multidimensionality, but that came more later, and intergalactic also, as just belief system shattered and shattered again. Shattered's not the right word. Expanded, and just kept expanding. So once I'd had those 4 sessions in the space of 3 years, life was 1000% different and so much better. And I just knew at that point I was meant to train myself. So at that point, I then, not long after, got in touch with Chris Turner from the UK, who had trained with Dolores Cannon. So that's where I launched from, and then trained with Dr. Brian Weiss, and then trained with Karen Wells, who was one of Dr. Newton's therapists. Along the way, became a Reiki Master and a certified spiritual teacher, because just there was so much to try and fit all the puzzle pieces in.
So how long have you been doing this work now, Wendy?
I've been doing this work since 2015.
Okay. And before your first regression and all of that, what was your mindset like? Were you pretty traditional, sort of, not on the
Yes.
awakening path?
Yes, exactly. I had an NDE in 1997, and that really shook some things up and changed some things in positive ways, but that didn't fully awaken me. I couldn't make sense of it until I started to wake up in 2010, when I met that soulmate that I'd had so many lives with. And he's the client that's in the Regression Healing I book. And we discovered 21 lives together.
So I did not realize you had had a near-death experience. You may know that I'm deeply involved with the International Association for Near-Death Studies.
Yes.
Been very interested in all of this material for quite a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about your near-death experience?
Sure. What happened in brief summary was August of 97, newly pregnant, and I ended up having 2 NDEs in a week, because my fundus, which is the top of the uterus, it's actually an aorta, ruptured when I was home alone, and I lost an estimated 3/4 of my blood supply that week. So they were just transfusing, trying to keep me viable, trying to keep me on the planet, and had 2 really beautiful, uplifting experiences and conversations with angels. In the first one, who woke me up because I'd passed out cold on the bathroom floor when it first happened, and no one was home. So, but this just insistent voice just kept saying to me, Wendy, you've got to wake up and call for help now, or you're going to go home.
Okay, this is familiar. So this was in your book then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I hear so many, I listen to so many near-death experiences.
Sure, as I say, hard to keep them all straight.
Okay. That was a very interesting part of the book. Okay. So anything else about the near-death experience and its connection to your work?
Yes. Learning to hear the divine, learning to open my clairaudience is just been the biggest deal for me. And to be able to trust it and to know and to be able to differentiate what's my ego, that like worried voice of, oh, do we do this? Do we do that? And just like not being in your heart place, heart-centered place with that, versus being able to discern your higher self, or being able to discern ascended masters, angels, whatever aspect of the divine is that you're communicating with. That has been the biggest difference in life, and just most positive difference in life.
Wonderful. Yeah, so my journey, just to fill in a little parallel with you, was that I have always been interested in spirituality. I've studied it extensively since I was a teenager. Didn't find a lot of great stuff in the 70s, 80s. There was few and far between things that really spoke to me. But I always had this little niggling interest in channeling and hypnosis. And so that was just in the back of my brain, germinating, growing slowly. And about, oh gosh, maybe 8 years ago now, probably about the same time frame for you, I decided that I wanted to learn hypnotherapy and got into that. And then it was like I got another calling. It's like, okay, I should. This past life thing is pretty interesting. I want to learn that too. So very interesting. So, which of your books was your first book? Tell us about your first book, Wendy.
The first book is Regression Healing I, and written as nonfiction, and it's written as a series. So the second one I'm just getting ready to publish. And it's the most interesting client sessions that I feel will be applicable to many people, because those universal themes like forgiveness and what happens when you don't forgive is just really, really compelling. And so the client in the first book, in Regression Healing I, he had significant physical pain. He had been in professional sports, and he also had broken his neck. And to just be living with that level of pain every day wasn't working for him. It was very life limiting, and he didn't want to take pain relievers and mask it, because this is the same soulmate who woke me up. This is the same boyfriend I met via Match. So he knew there was a different way. He knew there was a better way. And I offered to facilitate a session for him. So that was just a really beautiful kind of turning of the wheel of, he introduces me to past life regression. And then 4 or 5 years later, I become his past life regressionist. And to be able to resolve that pain by finding 2 lifetimes of origin was a really, really big deal to improve his quality of life. He also was able to learn how to connect with his higher self, his own soul, for the first time, and with his guides. So to do all that in a couple of hours, that's pretty mind-blowing to me still.
Yes, absolutely. And tell us about how your other books came along before we get back to that.
Sure. I wrote the Flow One, Plymouth Plantation. I wrote it as historic fiction. Plymouth Plantation in Massachusetts, so colonial America, 1600s, early settling of the United States, along with down in Jamestown in Virginia. And it was a very, very surprising experience where back in 1989, I'm newly married. We're living in Boxford, Massachusetts, so about an hour and 15 north of Plymouth. And very quickly, I start having experiences with a ghost on the property. My husband was traveling extensively for business, and almost several times a week, I'm having experiences with this heartbroken young female ghost who's clearly on the property. I don't know what to make of this. I'm a 28-year-old newlywed who's an MBA, who just doesn't have any belief system in this. It's 1989. You can't Google, what do I do with the ghost on my property? There is no Google. I didn't know what to do with it. So that went on the entire 4 years that we lived in the house. My husband wasn't interested in talking about it. He just thought I was having some weird anxiety about being alone. I'm in this big house on 2 acres by myself so often. It's like, I'm not anxious about that. I love our house. I love our property. That's not it. So just don't know what to do with it. So we moved from Massachusetts out to Seattle in 1993. And I'll be honest, I wanted to help this heartbroken ghost, but I didn't know what to do for her. I didn't know how to help her. I didn't know to say, you need to look up. You need to go to the light. You need to let go. You don't have a body. I didn't have any of that knowledge or wording to be able to share and to, give some energy and say, go on up. Yes, you've got a choice, but you're invited to go on up and you'll feel so much better. So I didn't know to do that. So we moved, and I'll be honest, I tried to put it in the box of interesting things that I don't know what to do with, and just kind of shove the lid on it. And what happened then was in 2013, so this went on over a time period of almost 20 years, all of a sudden, one of my best friends out in the Seattle area, who I've never spoken of this story to, I've not shared it with people. And she tells me that she got woken up in the middle of the night by her dog. She goes to let the dog out, and the dog instead is madly barking at something on the living room ceiling. And that something turns out to be a specter, turns out to be a ghost. And she has to work really hard to clear this ghost from her home, because she said she almost got just swept it up into the heartbreak. The heartbreak was so incredible. And she did clear her house, and then contacts me the next day and says, are you sitting down? It's like, okay, that's an interesting call from a friend. Yes, I'm now sitting down. What do you need to tell me? And she summarized what had happened and told me that ghost was me. And it was colonial America times, because she could tell by the clothing. And I immediately pictured that ghost and knew. And she also shared with me, she'd been with me in that lifetime, and we'd been best friends, and she'd lived next door to me. So I think that's why it was kind of natural. My soul went to her for help, because she was going to know what to do. So I ended up cleaning up my own ghost and doing a soul retrieval of my own ghost. And the difference in how much better I felt after that was just night and day, even though, again, it really blew open my belief system, because starting back in 89, I'm not sure I believe in ghosts. And then here I am in 2013 doing a soul retrieval of my own past life from colonial America. So that's what that book is about. And then Heaven Sent is a multi-author collaboration. And I have a short story in it called The War Dog, which was about fostering a German Shepherd, female German Shepherd named Berlin. And I agreed to foster her, which got her pulled out of a kill shelter down in California, brought up to Seattle. So it truly saved her life. And all kinds of amazing things happened in the short time period that I fostered her, making me realize I was fostering my own war dog from World War II. And she had saved my life in World War II when I was a young American soldier sent to Berlin. And here I'm fostering a dog named Berlin, and she's a German Shepherd. So at some point I was saying to my guides, thank you for giving me like these past life clues. It's like past life regression for beginners. It's like, I so appreciate this to help me put the pieces together.
Could they be any more obvious?
Right. It's always obvious once we figure it out and, get it to click into place. Those are the confirmations. Those are the validations. So
and
I wasn't able to keep her, but she went to a great home.
And you mentioned that you live near Plymouth.
Yes. Yes, I did live near Plymouth. I was in Massachusetts from, let's see, it would have been 1984 until 1993, so just about a decade.
But that then has more connections to some of your past life adventures.
Yes, it does. And once I had woken up spiritually, I thought back to that time period when I had lived in Boston, and I had never had a panic attack in my life. I didn't even really know what they were. But the first time I went on that Mayflower replica, having a perfectly wonderful day, I'm in my 20s, I'm there with family and friends. We're having a great time. We're like, well, let's just go see the Mayflower replica. It's an interesting part of history. Let's go see this Plymouth plantation, this historic, living museum outdoor place. This just sounds, really fun to do with visitors from out of town. I was
Right.
not on the Mayflower replica for more than 2 minutes. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't stand it on here. I feel like I've been on here for months. I'm just like ready to retch. And we're so crammed in. And it was all these past life memories coming in, but I didn't know what they were because I just
Mm.
didn't know the concepts. So I ended up having to excuse myself and like run outside because I thought I was just going to be sick. And that was, I came over on one of those ships, and those were not easy voyages. They lasted for months. And we came over on cargo ships. These were not easy passages. So we're down where they
Did
store
you
wine.
did you revisit that uh, voyage in a past life regression?
I did. I did. And it came up in such detail and such clarity because it was during the process of me having to accept that I hadn't gone to the light in the 1600s because I felt some shame around that. And I just felt like I hadn't closed things out properly. And so I was trying to understand why. So I did a past life regression, but I knew enough at that point. It was one of the QHHTs that I did. So it was my third or fourth session. And I knew enough by that point to just surrender, to not ask to go to a specific past life. I just left it to my higher self and guides and the divine, whatever would be most helpful for me and most uplifting for me. But that was immediately what came through in all this detail. And I spoke as Anne Warren Little, who was Richard and Elizabeth Warren's daughters. Richard Warren was on the 1620 Mayflower. He was one of the original people who had gone over, and just the detail that came through. And I don't remember ever studying that in school. I was never especially interested in history. So to have
Right.
all this detail come through and to have a great therapist who just kept asking open-ended questions of, well, where did you live and how did you build your houses and what were you eating and how did you stay warm enough? And, just all this detail came through, as well as me recognizing many people from the past life in Plymouth in the 1600s are back in my life again now. An astonishing number. I've added up like 17 of them I've met.
Wow.
And when I asked and meditated and asked my guides why, they said, because you had a significant cleanup to do from that life. So we sent you in with like as many people as we could organize. I even had the same cat to just help me get the job done of recognizing of who I had not forgiven and why I had stayed behind as a ghost. So
So you're cleaning up a lot of history here in this
yes,
lifetime. You're
yes,
helping yourself as a past ghost, and you're meeting with lots of folks that you've had at least a few lifetimes with.
yes,
So it's fascinating to me how uh, I love that you titled your book Regression Healing. It's incredible how healing the regression process is. And it's amazing how when you do a regression session, the perfect lifetimes come up, the ones that they're meant to resolve or face or experience in one way or another. Um, I I continue to be amazed at just how perfect these sessions go, because our higher self, or whatever you want to call it, is kind of working with us, and
Architecting.
it's not just your higher self guiding you as a therapist, but guiding the patient or client, excuse me, um, and we're all kind of working together and sort of feeling our way through this process of, okay, what's next, and all right, what are you seeing now? So
Mm-hmm.
it's just amazing to me.
It is. I agree. There's such beauty to how that just happens organically. What I suggest to clients, because we always do a 15-minute planning call before the session, and I just suggest to them, just ask your higher self and guides to write your questions with you for the session, and just start, getting that energy flowing right from the beginning, because they'll architect it. As you said, it's amazing how they bring in the perfect information and healing to improve life now. Is just the way I asked to frame it. That's typically what we're doing.
I love that. So I want to ask about, you mentioned that you had an MBA, or have an MBA. How difficult was it for you to begin to accept this? Although it sounds like you kind of jumped in the deep end and kept swimming.
I did jump in the deep end. It was not an easy transition, because none of my family was interested in anything to do with spirituality. I would describe us as kind of like casual Christians, and believed in God, believed in Jesus, but it just did not go. Believed in the love, believed in God being love, but it just did not go a lot further than that.
Hmm.
So to have so many remarkable experiences was a really big surprise to me, and it just came with that near-death experience, as I said, in '97, and then it was like a pin got put in it, because unfortunately I didn't know about IANDS. And the irony of that, because here I am in Seattle, the oldest chapter in the country, just celebrated their 40th anniversary, and I didn't know about it. But so it took that boyfriend, it took that match relationship to get me to wake up. And he ended up being the sea captain that had brought me over to Plymouth, and who had not married me when I thought that's where we were going. So that's what I hadn't forgiven.
Hmm.
So just being able to let go of that, and for us to finally, once we'd worked it all through, and all the drama and trauma of the soul retrieval and everything else, and to finally just be able to have a beer together and say, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Just like bearing this grudge from the 1600s, and it's not good for me in any way. So we were able to just, clank glasses and say, glad that's over. And we figured that out, because it
So,
just freed up my energy.
so Wendy, I have a theory. Let me share it with you, and feel free to, disagree or have a different perspective. But my theory is that when we plan an incarnation, we, I think, pick certain past lives that are going to be key to this life. And we bring the echoes and the challenges and the lessons of those lives with us to this one. But it's, we've got hundreds of these past lives, but we pick, okay, I'm going to take this challenge here and this thing there and this forgiveness lesson, and we say, okay, that's going to be the mix for this lifetime. Does that sound
I
like
think that makes a lot of sense. I think our soul very carefully plans, along with elders and guides, and then the soul group of, here's what I want to master, here's what I want to learn, here's some scenarios of how we might do it, and then we just start orchestrating this very complex play run, so to speak, or some call it a video game or simulation, some call it school, whatever analogy works best for you. And that makes perfect sense what you're saying of certain past lives are going to have the echoes. There are the rare people who throw open their entire Akashic records. I'm one of those people. So it's been pretty astonishing to me how many of them have come up and that I can access all of them. But it's needed for my life purpose. That's not needed for most people's life purpose, and it would be overwhelming. So I agree with what you're saying. It's more often this careful choosing. So those echoes, those imprints then come through, and then that's what you're going to pull the thread on and work through.
Yeah, the challenges that you're going to try and resolve in this lifetime. There's
Right.
another person who I know, who I've worked with, and she taught herself regression, and she was doing one a week approximately
Mhm.
with a friend, and the
Mhm.
friend was there to, because she was
Help facilitate.
trance, in trance and asking questions for her, but she was basically doing it herself, and uh, at the end, if you will, of that process, she ended up channeling. So
Mhm.
made connections. It got deeper and deeper. So it's sort of like meditation leads us to be more open and able to bring through some information. And then going through all those regressions brought her to an even higher state of
That makes
alignment.
perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. I'm also a channel, and I worked at home in the Akashic records when not incarnated in a body. I worked in the Akashic records for eons. So it just
Interesting.
kind of made perfect sense to then become a past life regressionist as well as just an avid reader and a writer. It's all Akashic records.
That makes so
So,
much sense. Yeah. Okay. Now we know why you have all these lives at your disposal, and you exploring
yes,
them all. It's like
yes,
I want to
yes.
see what this is like when I tapped into them all in one lifetime.
Right, right. Exactly. Exactly.
So you've mentioned forgiveness,
Mhm.
and I want to touch on the the miracle that forgiveness is. Can you speak to us a little bit about your experience with forgiveness?
Absolutely. I think forgiveness is miracle is the perfect word because when we forgive others and when we forgive ourselves, because often forgiving ourselves is the hardest last stage of mastering forgiveness. And it's certainly not something that we master in a lifetime. And that is one of the main lessons I came in with this lifetime was I wanted to master forgiveness so that it just became automatic and you can get to the point where you realize there really isn't anything to forgive at all. I haven't quite reached that point, but it frees up your energy because otherwise you can just be creating all these cords of attachment with other people or with situations or with expected outcomes, and your ego just gets all crazy and just out of balance. So it doesn't
So I
mean
found,
that, go ahead.
go ahead. No, no, you.
It doesn't mean that you're condoning a behavior. For instance, if something happened to you, like you were abused as a child, it doesn't mean that you're condoning child abuse, but it does mean that you might be able to look at, did that person do the best they could? Are they so wounded? Is this just, cycle after cycle through a family, for instance, or through whatever group that it's passing on through? And can we just see, the wounding in them and just let go of what happened to us and just realize it's just we're not meant to be martyrs or victims. We're meant to find a way to keep raising our vibration and frequency and just be honest. Oh my gosh, that XYZ certain circumstance or experience was horrible. It was really hard. I did not enjoy my car being totaled and all those airbags going off in my face. but it was for a higher purpose. I know what the purpose was. I did not enjoy being laid off from a job I really enjoyed that was close to home and, well paid, and did love that 401k and health insurance for the family. Did not enjoy that going away, but just able to take a breath and say, what's the higher purpose here? How do I up level? How do I just keep going up? How do I look at this as an opportunity rather than, woe is me, and terrible things always happen to me?
I could not agree more. Yeah, I found in all my studies and my work that when we take our challenges as blessings in disguise, but take them as blessings, and instead of the woe is me, take the, oh, well, that's interesting. I wonder where this is going to take me.
Yes.
And having that positive perspective.
Saying, why is this happening for me rather than why is this happening to me? Yeah. Just helps you more stay in your place of personal power, because we do have choices to make, even if it's only to choose our attitude. Sometimes that's all we've got.
Yes, absolutely. So more about that. So it seems that one of the things that I've found is that physical issues are almost always a key point for us, our learning in this lifetime, whatever it might be. Now, you can have two people with knee problems, and they can be entirely different lessons that they're trying to learn. Mm-hmm. But so, it's not like it's that consistent, but it's consistent that in my experience, that when somebody has a physical problem in an area, it relates to some kind of stuck energy.
I couldn't agree more.
Something that's not been released. So yes. Talk a little bit, if you will, about some of your experience in clearing those kinds of physical problems.
Certainly. I always encourage clients to write the 20 questions for the longer sessions, for the 2.5 hour or the 4 hour. And I suggest I send them in email format. What are your health questions? And then anything about wealth, finances, career, anything about relationships, and then miscellaneous. So because our bodies really, really matter, and we know mind, body, spirit, and this is our beautiful container. And if it's not healthy, if it's not feeling well, if it's not doing well, we're going to have issues in just all areas of life. So I use, during session, I often use Louise Hay's Heal Your Body book. And if someone's having knee pain, you'll just look up what she suggests might be the emotional component of that. And then there's an affirmation, and I'll just ask the person those questions. I mean, certainly I can be hearing more specifics from my guides during the session, but it's just a nice jumping off point. And I'd say about 99 out of 100 clients will say, yeah, that's right on. That, that I'm surprised you can say it that succinctly. That does reflect what's going on. So for people to be able to resolve things like chronic pain, that is huge. Being able to resolve mobility problems. Those were two of the ones I needed to work through myself. So those became some of my specialties. Being able to work through emotional pain, heartbreak from whatever type of relationships. I have worked with people who have lost children. And I think that is one of the hardest things that we can go through, is to have a child pass on. So that sort of thing. I've had people who've had, anything and everything, Lyme disease, things going on with their heart, cancer, all kinds of dermatology things. The dermatology is interesting. Anything to do with skin almost always seems to lead back to having been burned. So just being able to very gently, very carefully, leading the person back through that and explaining, that they're not going to be re-traumatized. We don't have to see a lot of detail. We can just hear a sentence or two from your guides. You can pull way back and see it like this tiny, tiny little screen if you need to see it. And if not, we can just hear, we can just be told about it so that it's not too traumatic for them. And then just saying to people, okay, so that was then, this is now. Now we can let go of the psoriasis, we can let go of the eczema, whatever, might be going on, the super dry skin, whatever might be going on that they don't need anymore. It was just a reminder, like you said, that imprint, so that they can go back and find what happened. And then I'll say something to people, I'm so sorry that you had that experience. So let's up level it. And let's also realize we've all been on the other side of the equation too. We have all thrown the match. We've all thrown the torch. And that shocks a lot of people because they're more comfortable being in that victim place. But when they're realizing that, they're like, oh my goodness. And, we'll check with their higher self and guides, and they're like, yes, that's absolutely true for you. And then we just start to realize, and then that helps people forgive because they realize what they're so upset about, so angry about, so humiliated about, whatever's causing them not to forgive now. There's a much bigger picture to it. So that can help.
There's a saying that I really like, which relates to the health question, and that is, what is emotionally suppressed is physically expressed. So that if you have a problem of some sort or another, look for some emotional trigger, some emotional hook of some sort.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love animals and do dog rescue, and I've always had animals. And it's interesting how often people's animals end up coming into their session with me. I'm not a trained animal communicator, but I do have some skills with helping with animal healing. And the first thing we'll look at, and they'll say, well, my dog's gimpy on their back left leg. I'm like, well, how's your mobility? Because the animals so often, just through their big loving hearts, particularly dogs, cats are better at clearing whatever. They just flick it off the end of their tail. But the dogs with those big, big, big hearts, they'll just take on the human issues. So if the dog's got cancer, the dog's got whatever, I'm like looking at, does the person have this, or did the dog take one for the team? And that's very interesting, starting to sort that out for people.
Yeah, and I found that our animals can reflect more than just health issues, but emotional issues and mental issues as well. So if
anxiety, separation anxiety, abandonment, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, if your pet's weird, it's probably because you're weird.
Let's just embrace the weirdness. Hey, I live 3 hours north of Portland. Keep it weird.
Yes, Portland,
Meaning,
keep it weird.
just that. I think it was Meryl Streep, I think, said, when you learn to embrace what's weird, different, imperfect, wacky about you, that's where you're going to find your best, biggest strength. And once you get really to be friends with that, the world is your oyster, because she's certainly not the traditional beauty, that would have had a successful acting career. So she just decided to embrace her uniqueness.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. So speaking of all this, then do you want to get into the many connections you have with the subject of your Regression Healing I book?
Sure. What we found over time, as I mentioned, was 21 past lives together. That was a shock. We certainly didn't find that out right away. That took 8 years.
So give us a little journey through your relationship and how you met and how that evolved.
Sure. The relationship.
In this life.
Yes. Yes. How that worked in this lifetime was in 2010. I'd been divorced for 6 or 7 years, and I went on Match.com and we met. He introduced me to Journey of Souls. He found my first past life regressionist for me and took me to my first LBL. So we dated exclusively for a little over a year. And it was amazing. So much shared communication and just excitement, joie de vivre in it. Really wonderful in many ways, but also very strange. It was a highest highs, lowest lows type of relationship. And I've never been one for drama. I have not enjoyed drama in relationships. So I'm like, why is this so dramatic? And he was feeling it too. And then we were just finding the lives, and that the energy from the past lives was so intense. Some of it was fun, and some of it was frankly not fun at all. So we found lives. We found 6 of them married. We found lives as siblings, as best friends, both genders switching roles, mother and child, lovers. We found we'd served in the silent monasteries together as scribes, and we're both writers in this lifetime. We found just so much information over that 8-year time period that we were working together as spiritual seekers. We broke up and were no longer dating after 13 months. But to my surprise, I just was so heartbroken when that ended, because I was still seeing the potential in it, even though it was a crazy ride. And he was just simply done. So I just thought, okay, well, this is done. I just don't need to see this individual again. So we didn't see each other for about 3 months, but that doesn't work when you still have a lot of energy to sort out, and you've planned to do that and you've contracted to do that. So we start running into each other to the point it was bizarre. And I'm like, oh, I think this means something. I think this means we still have work to do. So pay attention to it if that ever happens to you. And we, at that point, as I was mending my heart, we got to the point where I was able to say, okay, we're going to put in new boundaries, new rules on this relationship, which is going to be spiritual seekers only. There's not going to be any other type of relationship here. And we started finding our soul contracts. And that was a really big deal, to start to know what those were and to recognize them. Because once you know them, you can sure work them a lot more efficiently versus just, thrashing about.
So say a little bit about that. What kind of soul contracts? Give an example.
I believe soul contracts are what we agree to. It's going to help us learn lessons, and it's what we agree to. It's simply agreements we make with another party before we incarnate. My first soul contract with him was to wake me up spiritually, which he did by introducing me to Journey of Souls, finding my first hypnotherapist for me, and becoming a spiritual seeker with me, because he was so far ahead of me when we started. So that was the first soul contract. So that was fantastic. Second soul contract, break my heart repeatedly until I stood in my power fully without abusing it. That is a brilliant contract, but obviously very painful. No one wants their heart broken repeatedly. So I had to really watch my boundaries, and I had to get the most pristine boundaries I'd ever had, which was very important and very useful. I also was able to transmute all my karma. I worked with a spiritual numerologist to find out what my karma is. Don't see it as punishment at all. I see karma as unbalanced energy. I see it as a teaching tool. I see it as an opportunity. My karma was for being a heartbreaker. So here he's got the contract to break my heart repeatedly. So I get to be on the other side of that one.
Gee, thanks.
Yes, to resolve that. And my other karma, I had more counts for not using my power appropriately. Because I'd abused it multiple times and been too heavy-handed, what I was doing in this lifetime was I was kind of like a shrinking violet. I wasn't self-actualizing in any way. I wasn't doing public speaking. I wasn't writing. I did not want to get on this path. So he kept doing whatever it took to get me. Sometimes it was a gentle push. Sometimes it was, come on, I'll hold your hand. Other times it was a swift kick in the butt. It was whatever I needed at the time, because he really felt the weight of that contract, that he needed to help me move into my power fully without abusing it. So that got accomplished.
Oh dear. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My audio cut out for a minute there, or for a moment. All right, I think we're okay. Saying my connection's unstable, so we'll see just how unstable it may be.
Well, let's call in Archangel Gabriel and ask her if she would be so kind as to help with internet connectivity, keep our connection going.
Yes, we'll surround ourselves in white light. So many different directions we could take here. Let's talk a little bit about the protection and how you use that in sessions. There are some people who are concerned about, things that we've been brought up with, certain beliefs we've been brought up with about negative things and so forth. I've found my own path to handling these things. Tell us about how you handle those things.
Sure. What I do during session is I help the person get wonderfully grounded as we start, and just fully into their body, calling in the higher self or the soul with all the distilled wisdom. And then I ask the guides to please come in. And I just use the generic term guides because it might be ascended masters, angels. It could be your great aunt Sally. It could be your childhood dog, Rover. It could be a totem animal, could be anything, could be a galactic being. But I just ask that the highest beings of light be with us, not only for that session, but be with us at all times, so that that person can continue to benefit, and so that I can continue to benefit from that energy. And I also ask that we be sovereign, that we only be carrying our own beautiful energy. And I often find I do need to do energy clearings for the person during the session, because there can just be emotions, there can be old energy, there can be low vibration energy, it can be our own. It's nothing to be scared of, but it sure wasn't serving me to carry around my whiny, stubborn ghost from the 1600s. I can call her that because it was me. So, that just doesn't serve us.
Right. That brings an interesting idea to mind, which I've had. The belief that we're all at one, that everything is connected.
Mm-hmm.
And it's occurred to me more than a few times that we're all just incarnations of each other. We're all different incarnations of God.
That makes sense. I see us all as a spark of the divine, and we're part of how God, the divine, is learning about itself, and just views us as very brave, because we're down here in the trenches. We're down here on the hard duty station. I think Earth is fantastic and beautiful, and we're privileged to be here. That doesn't make it easy.
No.
Again, we don't enjoy it when there's the big challenges going on, and often we can get into that negative spiral of, if there's health problems, there's going to be financial problems. There's going to be relationships being strained. It's just one thing leads to another. But the opposite is true too. You clear one health issue, or you clear one relationship issue, and oh my goodness, we can get that that virtuous circle, and that uplift going too.
Yeah, I use that concept of being soul family with others as one of the things that to help me be more kind and compassionate and loving. When somebody's a little bit annoying, I think, okay, they're helping me learn how to deal with that. And I'm
Sure.
sure, I'm sure
Or
I've been that way in a past life
right. Why,
or this
why am
life.
I being triggered? That person seems very aloof. And I'm like, oh, well, I better look at me first. Do I come across that way sometimes when it's not helpful? Maybe they're just feeling a little nervous or they're not realizing it's just kind of like a persona they put on as a little bit of a defense mechanism or, whatever it might be.
So, if you don't mind, let's go back to the Akashic Records angle here.
Certainly.
What have you learned about the Akashic Records and about yourself and your connections there?
Sure. What I've learned is, as I mentioned, serving in the Akashic Records, it started off with just being able to bring someone's book of life to them. So, kind of the librarian retrieving the book. Well, that's a big deal when you're in the place of all knowledge, where there's a book for everyone, because everyone does have a book of life. And then over time, typically guides, angels were coming forward with people to consult their book of life. It was usually, helpers were with them, but certainly there were some adepts that would come on their own, like an Akashic record reader or a very experienced psychic, or whomever might come on their own. And then over time, it kind of evolved where the guide or guardian angel might not be available, or they would say, Wendy, you take it. And I'd be helping the person, look at that life. Like they might come in and say, oh, well, I had a reading and there was a certain past life where this happened. Can you help me understand that life more? So, I started, interpreting and helping them with it a little bit. And that over time led to my becoming, I'll call it a beginning guide or a junior guide. You can see where one would kind of like morph to the other. Personally, I believe I've had approximately 2,600 lives, is what I've been consistently told by my guides, and it's been verified every way I can verify it. We only know what we know until we get home and know more. And about half of them have been on Earth, and about half of them have been on other planets and in other dimensions. So it's really wonderful and interesting to see people starting to have these sessions where all of a sudden they're remembering an off-planet life and they want help normalizing that and to not feel like they're a nut, or they're remembering a life as a fairy or as a mermaid or whatever it might be, and just being able to respectfully explore that with them, because I think it's
Yeah,
delightful. I think it's so intriguing.
yeah. So, um, for for myself, when those things happen, I can see some people feeling like, well, that's crazy. But no, it's all reasonable. And even if it might perhaps be um, something a little different than a regular human lifetime,
Mhm.
that those experiences in regression are also equally healing and
Absolutely.
valuable.
There's a reason for it because there's all the different experiences. So, as we said earlier, why did the higher self and guides, why are they choosing that one?
Right.
I recently heard this was another hypnotherapist session, but the person was having severe skin issues. And that time it was not from having been burned, that time it was from having been a tree. And he had so enjoyed being a tree, and think of all that, thick bark. He'd been a tree for like 10,000 years and he
Mhm.
hadn't really let go of that. So he was having all these skin problems until he remembered during the session the lifetime as a tree. And then guess what? No more skin problems. And I mean,
Cleared right up.
Western medicine can't, the dermatologist can't help us with that. I used to be a tree. It's just, there's no ICD-9 code for that, you know?
For those who don't know what ICD-9 is, that's medical insurance reimbursement code. So, yeah, And now I've had a couple of people who've remembered lives in an alien environment as
Mhm.
extraterrestrials.
Uh-huh.
Have you had that as well?
Yes, yes. And I didn't have those types of clients at first. I think because I wasn't comfortable with it at first. I
Yeah,
had to do my own healing and have my own experiences and remembrances in that area. And then pretty quickly, they started to come. I think that the guides and the divine are just looking at, you know, which hypnotherapist or which healer is open and will be able to tactfully work with this and help with this. So we'll send them there. We'll send them there.
right.
They kind of know how to
Exactly.
triage to us.
It's incredible how I find, people find their way to me, and we're like a perfect match. That,
Mhm.
their issue and my experience and my techniques and my approach is just dead on perfect for them.
That's wonderful. Do you find some that you've actually had past lives with? Does that come up occasionally?
There was one. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. And there was one recollection I had from when I was young, as maybe 6 or 7 years old, something in that early age group. And as I mentioned it, I'm beginning to get some tightness in my shoulder here. I had a dream quote between quotes, that I was a Native American, and somebody caught me in the shoulder with like a tomahawk or
I was
something.
going to say, was it
And
arrow, knife, tomahawk? Yeah, yeah. I was feeling
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, okay, that was that. And then I get, fast forward like 30 years, and I have my second son, and I'm carrying him around, and there's that pain again,
Mhm.
you know, and I'm doing little league with him, and I'm pitching balls for batting practice. There's that pain again. Now I haven't gone through this in regression, but clearly there's some connection there with that son.
And you may find he was in that lifetime. We'll just leave it at that.
Very probably, yeah,
Yeah,
based on the way these other um, experiences play out with
yeah,
our
yeah,
clients.
yeah. And what a beautiful opportunity to clear it. Mhm.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's still a little bit of an annoyance,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so
but
it's your right side. So it's the giving, it's the active male side. Okay, interesting.
yeah, that's another interesting. You bring up that point. I find myself very balanced between male and female energy in this lifetime.
Oh,
I
that's
know some people
wonderful.
some people come in and they're very male or they're very female in energy, even though they may be the opposite in gender.
Mhm,
Um, have
mhm.
you had some experiences like that?
Yes, I think learning to balance our masculine and feminine is one of the most important things we can do. And that's something I always look at, either with myself, if there's a health issue going on, like you said, the tight right shoulder, to think about which side of the body that is, with the right side being the masculine and the left side being the feminine receiving side. I had a lot of issues with receiving. It's like I worked very hard, but it just seemed like, it was like there wasn't traction with what I was doing, despite the great education and, despite the work. And so what do I find out was in the World War II lifetime, when I was the soldier sent to Berlin, stepped on a bomb, and my left leg and foot was blown off and had to be amputated above the knee. So multiple healers said to me, it's interesting, Wendy, when I look at you energetically, you don't seem to have the left foot and the left lower leg. How's your receiving? And I said, oh my gosh, that is really interesting. So I needed to go to Glastonbury, England. And my guides
Mm.
told me for years, you need to find a way to get out to Glastonbury, and we will provide a healing for you for this issue with your body, because there's a problem with your energy body that's impacting your life and your finances, etc. So I finally got out there, and it was incredible what happened. I was in the Chalicewell Gardens, and I waded in the water of this cold, cold spring water from the red well, and was in it up above my knees. And when I got out of it, I went over and just sat on a bench and was meditating. And my left leg just started vibrating. I'm looking around like, why is no one like noticing or commenting on the earthquake? And then I'm like, wait a minute, why is my right leg not having the earthquake? It was my left leg being restored. And it was amazing. And when I got home and had a healing session with the healer, I didn't tell her any of this background, because I think it's useful to just, kind of pull things back to be able to validate and make sense of your own truth as much as you can. And I just, told her that I'd had a kind of a left leg healing while I was in England. I left it at that. And she looked at my energy body and she said, Wendy, you've got like the biggest man foot on your left side. It's like a size 12 man foot. I thought, well, evidently I had big feet back in World War II.
And hairy too, huh?
It was just really interesting how she was like picking up on that. And it did start to change things of being able to receive more. And I also felt a lot of changes to graciously receive, to just be able to feel more in my left hand, because same thing, of also receiving there. Because I was just one of those people, I would say, overly independent to the point where it didn't really make sense, but I didn't realize it. So, if I go out for lunch with a friend and they're like, oh, let me pick it up, it's your birthday this week. And I'd be like, no, absolutely not. No, I'm going to split the bill with you. It's like, it was really hard for me to receive even the simplest things. So that was making life challenging, because I couldn't live my purpose if I wasn't balanced in my masculine and feminine energy. If I was always in this, do place of the masculine. And having been a single mom since my children were 6 and 8, and having been raised by a single mother, I think there was just a lot of masculine energy, because we had to do both parts. Right. So things just weren't balanced correctly.
Yeah, it's very interesting how our relationships help with those things, whether they're the family relationships or the chosen relationships.
Yes.
Yeah, I had one session with somebody who, it turned out we had a life together, and we were both very senior people in one of Caesar's armies, and
okay.
And we were working together, and we had some disagreements about strategy and tactics, and this person was kind of
the first thing I heard was military strategy when you said that.
Yeah, and this person was kind of a take no prisoners kind of person, and I was more on the compassionate side of like, we don't really have to annihilate the women and children too, do we? Mm-hmm. So many other interesting things we could get into, but let's transition to questions and answers here. We've been at this for almost
I'd love to.
an hour and 15. And so there is one person with a hand up, and if somebody wants to put a question in the chat instead, feel free to do that. And we'll move into this Q&A portion of the conversation. Oh, our raised hand has taken her hand down. So we'll wait for anybody. Meanwhile, there was a question in the chat, which was asked to elaborate on what happens when we don't forgive.
Oh, that's a great question. I think we just lower our vibration because there's just resentment and there's anger. And anger is tricky because that's a secondary emotion. You've always got to look at what's below it, or as you peel the onion with it. So I think we're doing ourselves such a disservice when we don't forgive. I think we just stay stuck. It's like being mired in whatever old energy and circumstance that you haven't been able to forgive. So I think we're likely to keep mirroring it and keep kicking up more scenarios like that. Here's another opportunity to clear it. And they're likely to get bigger and more challenging and rougher because we didn't clear it at the more subtle, gentle manner.
Right, right. Take the opportunity when you've got it. It reminds me of a saying, enlightenment is a lot about lightening up, and hanging on to baggage by not forgiving is the opposite of lightening up.
Right,
So,
right.
so we have a hand up from, looks like we might be out of questions here. Is it, if anybody else is interested, you can raise your hand. We've got a few more minutes. Wendy, is there anything else that you would like to touch on?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me and for the great questions and participation, everyone. I'm going to be having a really neat workshop, a free via Zoom workshop slash book club with Bob Snow, who wrote Portrait of a Past Life Skeptic. And this is one of my favorite first-person accounts of just an amazing past life regression. It's going to be on Thursday, July 28th, from 4 to 5:30 Pacific time, and you can just go to my website, which is wendyrosewilliams.com, and ask for more information and for the link to that event. But what we're going to do is Bob is going to share his story, and he was a police captain for 38 years. This is not the typical person that goes and has a past life regression. So he had 38 facts that he felt could be proved or disproved from his session. And he set out to disprove them because he thought past life regression, he thought reincarnation in past lives was hooey. So therefore it's Portrait of a Past Life Skeptic. What he ends up doing is proving, I think it was 36 out of the 38 facts over a really deep dive by working it as a case for several years. It was pre-internet days. So it was a lot harder to be able to do this type of work. But he finds his life, his past life as an obscure portrait painter in New York City. And he tells a great story. And just like, as I said, to hear this, kind of hard-bitten, just the facts, ma'am, kind of gentleman, he's now in his 70s, share the story. It's a pretty great experience. So you're so welcome to join me for that event and read the book and be able to ask him some good questions.
Very good. And you mentioned your website. I'm going to put a link to it in the chat.
Thank you.
WendyRoseWilliams.com, just the way it sounds.
Perfect. And listeners are welcome to, you can request a complimentary 15-minute phone appointment with me there, and just happy to talk about what's going on for you and how I might be of service, and just offer any help that I can.
Excellent. Well, I guess we're done here. I don't see any more questions. Wendy, you've been an awesome guest. Very grateful and very interesting. So many points of connection, so many interesting things going on.
Well, thank you. I just so appreciate this forum. This is so fantastic that you've got this live forum and just wonderful people participating and just asking these sorts of questions. It's wonderful.
We wish you all the best. We thank you. And with that, I think we can bring this to a close.